25 Scottish dishes your great-gran knew by heart. Once everywhere, now half forgotten. From smoked fish to farmhouse puddings, let's bring them back. 1. Pau Zody, sheep's hide broth. Great-gran's version of nose-to-tail cooking started with a very literal nose. Pau Zody is sheep's head broth, sometimes with the trotters in the pot as well. The head was singed, not skinned, to keep the flavour, then scrubbed clean before being simmered for hours with mutton, barley and water. In went peas, carrots, turnips, onions and parsley, turning the pot into something closer to a rich stew than a thin soup. It's especially associated with Edinburgh and belongs to the era when every edible scrap of an animal was used. For an older Scottish kitchen, this wasn't a dare food or a gimmick, it was a proper Sunday broth. 2. Crappit hide. The same waste-nothing logic reached the fishing villages, but now it was the haddock staring back at you. Crappit hide comes from the northeast coast. A large fish head, usually haddock, had the gills removed, then the cavity was packed tight with a mixture of oatmeal, suet, chopped onion and seasoning. The head went back into a pan of lightly salted water or fish stock, often with the rest of the fish simmering alongside it. Once cooked, the head was lifted out, split open, and the savoury oatmeal stuffing scooped onto plates, with some of the poaching liquor and fish alongside as a filling everyday meal. 3. Parton brie. On days when the Creoles brought in crab rather than haddock, the same coastal cooks went for parton brie. The name is straightforward Scots. Parton means crab, brie means broth. Brown crab bodies and shells were simmered first to make a strong stock, usually with onion. The picked meat went back into the pot with rice or sometimes oatmeal, to thicken it into something substantial. Some households served it as a simple crab and rice soup. Others finished it with milk or cream so it edged closer to a chowder. Either way, it was designed to stretch a single crab into a full family pot. 4. Cullen skink. Further along the Moray Firth, the name of the soup comes straight off the map. Cullen skink is named for the town of Cullen in Moray, and the classic version starts with smoked haddock, ideally Finnan haddie. The fish is gently cooked, then flaked into a base of onions, potatoes and stock, with milk often replacing water, and in some recipes, a splash of cream to enrich it. The result sits somewhere between a soup and a chowder, thick, smoky and built around just a few ingredients. Today it's served from hotel dining rooms to village cafes and even has its own Cullen Skink World Championships in the town each year. 5. Scotch broth. Not every famous Scottish soup belongs to one harbour town. Scotch broth is the classic all-in-one pot. A piece of lamb or mutton on the bone, pearl barley, and whatever root vegetables were to hand, usually carrot, turnip, leek, celery and onion. The meat and barley are simmered first to make a thick stock, with the diced vegetables added later so they keep some shape. Older recipes sometimes add shredded cabbage or kale towards the end, turning it into something closer to a stew than a clear soup. It's been described for over a century as a national soup and turns up in traditional Scottish cookbooks again and again. 6. Cocker-leekie soup chicken. Alongside the lamb and barley pots, there was a poultry soup with a much longer paper trail. Cocker-leekie is essentially chicken and leeks simmered together, often with rice or barley today, but older recipes use prunes for sweetness and a few peppercorns for warmth. The dish is documented in Scottish cookery sources from at least the 16th century, evolving from French chicken and prune soups into something distinctly local built around leeks. Modern versions sometimes skip the whole prunes or serve them separately, but the basic idea hasn't shifted much. It's still the traditional soup course at many burn suppers, arriving at the table before the haggis is piped in. 7. Stovies. If cocker-leekie belongs to the big occasions, stovies live in the ordinary weeknights. The basic idea is simple. Sliced potatoes and onions go into a pot with beef dripping or leftover gravy, plus scraps of cold roast beef, lamb or corned beef if they're available. The mixture is covered and cooked gently so the potatoes part break down and soak up the fat and juices, giving that soft, almost mashed texture people associate with the dish. In some households it's white stovies, with barely any meat. In others it's darker and richer from onions and gravy, but the slow stoving on the stovetop is the constant. 8. Mince and tatties. On the same sort of kitchen tables, Another standby turned up again and again. Mince and tatties is simply beef, mince browned with onions, then simmered with stock or gravy, sometimes with carrots added, until the meat is soft and coated in a thick savoury sauce. The potatoes are boiled and mashed separately with a little milk and fat, then the mince is spooned over the top or alongside. Many families add peas on the plate or serve it with a spoon of beetroot or pickled onions, but the core idea stays the same: a minced beef stew paired with mashed tatties as a standard Scottish weekday tea. 9. Tatty soup. The potatoes didn't only end up mashed. Tatty soup is a straightforward pot of diced potatoes simmered with onions, leeks, and often carrots in a basic meat or vegetable stock. Older Scottish recipes sometimes add a little barley or celery, but the flavour mostly comes from the allium mix and a long, gentle simmer that softens the vegetables into a light, milky-looking broth. Some cooks blend part of it for a thicker texture, others leave it chunky and closer to a vegetable broth, yet the core remains the same: a potato-based soup built from everyday ingredients already in the house. 10. Skirly. If tatty soup made the most of potatoes, skirly does the same job for oats. The name skirly comes from the skirl or shrill hiss of oatmeal and onions frying together in hot fat. Pinhead or medium oatmeal is stirred into melted sweet, dripping or butter with finely chopped onions, then slowly cooked until the grains are coated, toasted, and lightly seasoned with salt and pepper. It's served piled beside potatoes, folded through mash, or packed into the cavity of a chicken or other bird as a loose stuffing. In How Towdy with Drappit Eggs, that same oat and onion mixture underpins braised chicken and poached eggs 11. Rumble-de-thumps, where skirly turns oats into a side dish, rumble-de-thumps does the same with leftover vegetables. The dish is associated with the Scottish borders and nearby areas. Boiled potatoes are mashed together with cooked cabbage or kale and onions, then spread in a baking dish, topped with grated cheese and baked until the top is browned and crisp. Some recipes fry the mixture lightly before it goes into the oven, but the core elements stay the same: mash, brassica, onion and cheese. It's often compared with English bubble and squeak or Irish colcannon, but the baked, cheese-topped finish is what marks it out as rumble-de-thumps. 12. Clapshot head further north and you find clapshot on Orkney tables. Potatoes and neeps are boiled together until soft, then mashed with butter into something far more luxurious than the ingredients suggest. Some cooks fold in chives or fried onions, others keep it plain, letting the sweetness of the swede carry it. Traditionally, it sits beside haggis, sausages or cold meats, soaking up juices on the plate. The key is to mash everything while still hot, so the neeps blend smoothly into the tatties. 13. Bros strip things back even further, and you get bros. A handful of coarse oatmeal goes into a bowl, and boiling water, milk or stock is poured straight over it. The heat scalds the grain, you cover it, and leave it to swell rather than simmering it on the stove. After a short rest, it's loosened with more milk or buttermilk and finished with a knob of butter. The result isn't quite porridge and isn't quite soup, but something in between. Older Scottish cookbooks treat it as everyday fare, quick to make, easy to carry, and substantial enough to start a working day. 14. Peas meal. Bros didn't always mean oats. In some Scottish kitchens, the bowl held peas meal instead. Roasted yellow peas, finely ground to a flour. Hot water or stock is stirred in to make a thick, savoury porridge, usually seasoned simply with salt and maybe a little fat. It's older, rougher country cooking, using pulses rather than grain, but keeping the same no-pot, no-fuss technique as oat bros. For farming families, it was a way to turn a stored dry ingredient into something warm and sustaining with nothing more than a kettle. Same method, different crop. 15. Sowens, fermented oat husk porridge. If peasmeal bros squeezed one more meal out of peas, Sowens pushed thrift even further with oats. Instead of the grain, you use the husks, the outer hulls, rich in clinging starch, soaked in water for several days until they ferment and turn sour. The liquid is then strained off, left to settle, and the thick pale sediment cooked into a tart, silky porridge. Traditionally, it could be eaten plain, salted, or with a little milk, and was strongly associated with poorer households and rural life. It's one of those dishes that turns what most people would throw away into a recognisable Scottish breakfast. 16. Bannocks were Scotland's everyday answer to bread. Thick, sturdy rounds of dough were slapped straight onto a hot girdle or heavy pan, scored into farls and flipped by hand. Instead of neat wheat loaves, they used whatever grain the land would tolerate, usually oats in the Highlands, sometimes barley or a mix. They could be plain and savoury alongside soup, or slightly enriched with fat for high days and holidays. Some regions had special festive bannocks tied to the farming year, others just treated them as the thing you threw together before heading back out to work. Either way, this was bread shaped by the climate as much as the cook. 17. Scottish oatcakes. Scottish oatcakes are what happened when bread met the Highlands and had to toughen up. Coarse oats, a bit of fat, salt and water are pressed into a rough dough, rolled thin and cut into rounds or farls. Traditionally, they were baked on a hot girdle, later in ovens, until dry enough to snap. Because they're low in moisture, they keep for ages in a tin, which made them ideal for crofters, shepherds and soldiers alike. On the table, they're multitaskers, a base for cheese, something to dunk in soup, or a not-too-sweet partner for jam. 18. Tatty scones, potato scones. Swap the oats for potatoes, and the breakfast plate changes completely. Tatty scones start as leftover mashed tatties mixed with a little flour, fat and salt, then rolled into thin rounds, cut into quarters, and cooked on a hot girdle or frying pan. They're soft rather than crumbly, so they soak up fat and egg yolk in a way an oatcake never will. On a full Scottish breakfast, they're non-negotiable, usually fried in bacon fat alongside sausages, eggs and tomatoes. Outside the cafe, most people buy them ready-made in packets and simply reheat them in the pan or under the grill. 19. Clootie dumpling. If tatty scones belong to the fry-up, clootie dumpling belongs to big occasions. A stiff mixture of flour, suet, dried fruit, sugar and spices is bundled into a floured cloth, the cloot, tied up and lowered into a pot of simmering water for hours. As it cooks, the flour on the cloth gels into that famous shiny skin on the outside of the dumpling. Once it's lifted out and unwrapped, it's sliced thick and served with custard, cream or just a splash of milk. Any leftovers are fried in fat the next day until the edges go caramelized and crisp. 20. Black bun. At Hogmanay, the most serious-looking thing on the table is often the black bun. Under a plain sealed pastry crust sits a very dense, dark fruit cake packed with currants, raisins, candied peel, sugar and warm spices, baked until it almost slices like cheese. Traditionally, it's made well in advance so the flavours can develop, then carried round the doors at New Year as a first-footing gift. Turning up with a whole black bun isn't just politeness. It's a very literal way of wishing the household plenty and good fortune for the year ahead. 21. Hatted kit. Hatted kit. In old Scottish farm kitchens, hatted kit was what happened before the milk ever saw a churn. Warm, just-drawn milk was poured into a bowl of sharp buttermilk, sometimes helped along with a little rennet, and then simply left alone. Over time, the acidity coaxed up a soft, trembling layer of curd on top. That thick layer was the hat, carefully lifted off, sprinkled with sugar, maybe a scrape of nutmeg, and eaten as a fresh, tangy dessert straight from the dairy. 22. Crowdie and cream crowdie on Highland crofts. Crowdie was the everyday cheese, a soft, tangy curd drained in the kitchen and spread thick on oatcakes. The fancy version came later. For weddings, Hogmanay, or just showing off a good summer of raspberries, that plain curd could be transformed into cream crowdie, lightly whipped with rich cream, folded through toasted oats, a splash of whiskey, and sharp, fresh berries. It's essentially an early form of cranachan, built on the same farm cheese that once started as a way to use up surplus milk. 23. Forfar bridie. In the Angus town of Forfar, the local answer to a meat pie is the bridie, a sturdy half-moon pastry you can eat in your hand. Finely chopped beef and suet are packed into short crust, sometimes with onion and a little seasoning, then folded over and sealed along the curved edge. Traditionally, a single slit on top meant no onion, two slits meant onion inside, so you knew what you were getting. Baked straight on trays in the bakery, they were made to travel, from town ovens to fields, fairs and football terraces. 24. Scotch pie, mutton pie. Scotch pies are the compact, no-nonsense cousins of the meat pie. Small, round and built with a tall, hot watercress shell that can handle serious filling. Inside, you get finely minced mutton or lamb, heavily seasoned with salt and pepper and sometimes a hint of spice, packed right up to the rim. The pastry sides are high, so the top can act like a little stage for mash or baked beans, piled on after it comes out of the oven. Sold in bakeries, chip shops and at football grounds, they're designed to be eaten hot, in your hand, without cutlery. 25. Arbroath Smokies, smoked haddock. Arbroath Smokies start life as plain haddock, but around the town of Arbroath, they're treated almost like a separate species. The fish are cleaned, lightly salted, then tied together in pairs by their tails and hung over hardwood fires in old barrel-shaped kilns. The lid and sacks are pulled over the top so the heat and smoke stay trapped, hot smoking the haddock until the flesh turns golden, flaky and deeply smoky, but still moist. Only smokies produced in and around Arbroath using this traditional method are allowed to use the protected name. They're usually eaten still warm with bread and butter, or folded into simple dishes like fish soup, mash, or creamy sauces.